Renata DiGregorio is live at the Duval County Courthouse. And Renata, who else have attorneys brought in to try and sway the jury in this case?
Katie, Tillis's attorneys argue that the death penalty is no longer appropriate because they believe that Tillis's brother was involved in killing Joni Gunter. Now, here at the courthouse, this is where prosecutors plan to call victims of Tillis's earlier convictions for rape, kidnapping, and child abuse to testify. Russell Tillis is on trial for the murder of 30-year-old Joni Gunter, whose dismembered remains were found buried in his Southside backyard in February 2016. Those remains were discovered as a result of a recorded confession, which Tillis now claims was fabricated. The jailhouse recording, in which Tillis confesses to numerous crimes, including murder, sex trafficking, and abuse of a dead body, is a key piece of evidence in the murder trial. In it, he says his brother, Claude Tillis Sr., was the one who told him to kill Joni Gunter and that he helped dismember her. Claude Tillis has not been charged with any crime. He did not respond to First Coast News' requests for comment. His son, Claude Tillis Jr., dismissed the state's allegations against his father as not true. So the big things to know right now, the jury will decide if Tillis gets life in prison or a death sentence. Tillis's attorneys are trying to sway the jury by involving his brother. Now, prosecutors repeatedly called this the House of Horrors during the trial. In the next half hour, we're going to talk about who else we will hear from here as this continues. I'm Renata DiGregorio, live in downtown Jacksonville. First Coast News on your side.